Hi, and welcome to the Week 7 lecture that will cover the topic of rationing healthcare for older adults. This reading begins on page 167 and goes to page 234 in your textbook. Moody and Sasser also set this up as a controversy because, as you can well imagine, rationing healthcare for older adults comes with many issues and many sources of debates. And those debates begin with the very real fact that the medical costs in our country are continuing to soar and soar rapidly. Medical costs in the last year of life amount to about 18% of the total lifetime medical costs and nearly 30% of the entire Medicare budget. So as you can imagine, older adults tend to be the focus of the issue when it comes to reducing the cost of healthcare spending. And we know that as we get older, we become more voracious consumers of healthcare services. Americans age 65 and above account for more than a third of all national healthcare expenditures, but they comprise only 14.5% of the total population. But public opinion polls, while they reveal that Americans are concerned about the high cost of healthcare, they don't necessarily contribute those high costs of healthcare to overuse by adults. Issues that you often hear discussed related to the increasing healthcare costs are things like fraud, waste, and abuse, and issues related to pharmaceuticals and how much money we have to spend in our country to obtain medications and profits that are being made by pharmaceutical companies and large healthcare systems. So Americans tend to want to address this issue not in a way that would restrict or limit our exposure and access to healthcare, but it's more intended to limit profits and limit the cost of what we have to pay for these healthcare. So as I said, older adults tend to be the focus and the target, if you will, of discussions related to how we're going to reduce the cost of healthcare. But the interesting thing is that care that is provided to older adults towards the end of their life is not high-tech care. It is supportive care, and especially so for the old population. So older adults are not large consumers of aggressive, high-tech medical care. And after the age of 80, the use of extensive and intensive care actually declines. So rationing healthcare for older people. Our crisis is coming in here with the rapid cost of healthcare. And the rapid cost of healthcare is in part due to longevity, the fact that people are living longer, but it's also due to increases in the availability of intensive services and high technology, the rate of utilization, new technologies that are being developed, and rise in wages and healthcare personnel, general inflation, fraud, waste, and abuse. So there are many reasons that we can attribute to how the cost of our healthcare is continuing to grow. And we, gerontologists, don't want to lay this burden at the foot of older adults and, if you will, blame older adults for the major increases that we're seeing in healthcare expenditures. So what does this term ration mean? It means to provide a fixed amount of a commodity that would be allowed to a person, or to limit or significantly restrict. That's what ration means. This is a target political issue. You will hear both sides of the political spectrum pointing fingers at the others, saying things like, if you vote for us, we will protect your Medicare. We will protect your Social Security. If you vote for them, they're going to cut back on your benefits and you are going to lose out and you are not going to get the health care. So it's very much a hot political discussion. It was more so a part of the national dialogue 10 years ago when President Obama was running for office, and he was promising that we would be seeing reforms to our healthcare system. And we did see reforms in the American with Disabilities Act, ADA, and not, what am I saying? Not the ADA, the Affordable Care Act. And that is legislation that was passed by President Obama that significantly reformed how healthcare services are paid for in our country. We're not going to get into that too much in detail, and I don't even think that it's referenced in the book. But it suffices to say that for many decades now, the topic of healthcare expenditures and what we are going to do as a country to try to control expenses has been a big part of our dialogue. So the question is being asked, should we restrict, limit, or even cut off healthcare coverage for older adults? Yet, as I said, the idea of rationing is very troubling to most Americans. There is a economist by the name of Daniel Callahan who has written an article that appears on page 187 of your book. And Daniel Callahan puts forth this argument that there are better ways for us to spend our future healthcare money than indefinitely extending the life of elderly people, and that at some point we reach the point of the cost of diminishing returns. So in other words, we're investing a lot of money into older people, but the return back to society in doing so is diminishing. He asked the question, has our affluence and our refusal to accept the aging process and limits on life, it contributes to evading the deeper truths about the place of aging and death in life. In other words, as a society, we're continuing to try and push back death, push back aging, stop the aging process, and extend life through technology. And Daniel Callahan is simply asking the question, does this make sense for us to do? We've talked in previous weeks about this idea of compression of morbidity, where the goal should be to help people live as long as possible, as healthy as possible, but not to extend life beyond what would be considered a normal, a normal lifespan. And so Daniel Callahan is asking the question, has our anti-aging societal beliefs now caught up with us? And his approach is very much based on chronological age. So when you reach your natural lifespan, and we know in this country that a natural lifespan is somewhere in the neighborhood of 75 years old, what should your access to health care be? In other words, what should Medicare pay for? What shouldn't Medicare pay for? Should a 75-year-old be able to receive a heart transplant? Should a 75-year-old be able to go on dialysis for 10 or 15 years? In other words, to what extent as a society are we willing to pay to extend life beyond what is considered to be natural? There is also another economist by the name of Nat Hentoff on page 192 that also, Peter Ubel on page 191 that echoes these theories that Daniel Callahan puts forth. But there's also an economist by the name of Nat Hentoff on page 192 that issues warnings to us and to the readers about this idea of a natural lifespan, and that he believes that setting limits based on chronological age is class biased, as well as other problems. But primarily his argument is that it's basically saying to poor people, well, if you get to be 75 and you need dialysis, and the government through Medicare is not going to pay for that dialysis, then the only choice that you have is you either pay for it yourself or you're going to die. Well, we know that poor, impoverished older adults do not have the resources to pay for many of these services that they might need. So what Hentoff is saying is that the chronological age is class-based, and it's not a part of our American culture to exercise this level of bias and ageism in our society based on somebody's age. So the book puts forward that there's other possible economic approaches that we could take, because to a certain degree, Daniel Callahan makes a lot of sense. Does it make sense for a 90-year-old person to be able to have a heart transplant? Does it make sense for a 95-year-old person to receive chemotherapy? There comes a point where the question needs to be asked, what is the cost-benefit analysis of doing and providing this medical treatment? So the book talks about different economic approaches that could be taken to deal with this issue versus just strictly basing it on chronological age. So the first is cost-benefit analysis, and that is, what is the return to society? What do we get back from this older person if we spend and put forth these resources to, let's say, pay for somebody to have dialysis for another 5 years if they're 80? What is the benefit back to society on that? And so you could take a look at that from an economic productivity. So if we are going to provide dialysis to 80-year-old people, what is the payback to society? Is that person going to be able to make contributions to society? Are they going to be able to pay taxes by being a large consumer? Are they going to be able to participate in society? And Daniel Callahan is saying, if this 80-year-old person is not able to functionally participate in society and be a contributor, why should we pay for this person to have dialysis? So cost benefit is one approach. Another one is cost effectiveness analysis, which is maybe what we have to do is to look at which treatment provides the desired outcome for the least cost. So maybe there are approaches that we should look at for certain situations where maybe the 80-year-old person doesn't get a solution that would be 100%, but maybe that 80-year-old person gets a solution that will be 75%. And what I mean by that is, let me just come up with an example. Let's say an 80-year-old has worn out knees and would need a knee replacement. Well, we know that a knee replacement is a very expensive procedure to have. It also involves a lot of therapy and recovery time. Instead of having a knee replacement, maybe this person goes in for injections, cortisone injections, instead of having the knee replacement. So we find a solution that will provide some relief, but maybe it doesn't provide 100% of the relief, if you see what I mean with that. So it's a cost-effective analysis. Then there is another approach called quality-adjusted life years. And the idea behind this is that 10 years of life with a disability doesn't equal 10 years of life with good health. So in other words, if somebody is going to require intensive services, what is the health of that person? If we provide those intensive services and they're going to live a productive life and quality of life for the next 10 years, maybe that's better than, say, giving a heart transplant to an 80-year-old obese person with diabetes. But maybe an 80-year-old that has no comorbidities, leads a very active, primarily healthy life. They just have a bad heart. If that heart were replaced and that person could resume living an independent, healthy, good life, maybe then that's worth it. So that is a quality of life adjustment that some economists say that we should be taking a look at. I want to be sure that you are going to read the readings at the end of your chapter, Why We Must Set Limits, which is reading number 16. And then the follow-up article by Nat Hentoff on page 192. I want to be sure that you read those. I think that, I know. There also, I want to just talk a little bit about the fact that as a society, rationing happens. Rationing occurs through different means. One is managed care. So managed care is a form of rationing. And the way that managed care works is that it's just that. Care and decisions and approvals about medical treatment have to be pre-approved or prior approved. Medicare has been exploring managed care programs for people that are in Medicare. And those programs and insurance options are becoming more prevalent for older adults, where the Medicare benefits are essentially funneled through a Blue Cross policy, a Humana policy, and then Humana essentially manages those benefits. So before an elderly person can get a knee replacement, for example, that knee replacement has to be approved by the insurance company. Right now, Medicare does very little pre-approving. So if the patient and the surgeon say, yeah, we're going to give this 80-year-old a new knee, Medicare doesn't get in the way of that. So managed care is one form of rationing. The book refers to other backdoor methods of rationing, things like access to health care. So if you're an older person that lives in a rural part of the country, and your nearest hospital is 40 miles away, you may forego getting healthcare treatment because it's just too inconvenient. Things like long waiting lists to see specialists. You've heard of these situations where somebody needs to go see a specialist, but let's say a rheumatologist, but it's going to take 3 months before that person can get in to see a doctor. So we already have forms of rationing. They might not be in your face type of rationing like Daniel Hentoff is suggesting, but they are forms of rationing that have existed in our healthcare system. And so Daniel Callahan is simply saying we need to take things one step further. I think that I have covered everything that I wanted to in this week's readings. I want to just let you know that this week is a pretty light week as far as your assignments. And part of the reason for that is I want to be sure that you have ample time to prepare for the midterm. So in your week 7 folder is a midterm study guide. Please take a look at that. And there's also then going to be a learning assessment over this material just under week 7. So do your learning assessment, take a look at that study guide for the midterm, and then next week, week 8, you will be taking your midterm exam. You will have Monday, let's see, let me get the date of that. Midterm is going to take place, it will open on Monday, March 4th. At 8 a.m. and it will be due on Friday, March 8th, I believe at the end of the day. So you'll have all week to get your midterm taken care of. It will be, I believe, around 80 questions or 80 points, and it will consist of multiple choice and maybe a couple of short essays. So if you have any questions, you know where to reach me, and I hope you have a good week. Thanks. Reach out with any questions. Bye-bye.